Hola, Eyeo. Mi nombre es Patricio González Vivo y es un honor estar acá con ustedes. Hello, Eyeo. My name is Patricio González Vivo and it's an honor to be here. Big thanks to Dave, Jer, Wes, and Caitlin for inviting me to share my work today. Also thanks to my wife, Jen Lo, who is a collaborator on all things, including this talk. I thought that I'm going to start by showing one of my most embarrassing work I ever done, and it's on the internet. So I'm going to show it to take it out of the way and to break the ice.
Stop me now. Don't stop me, 'cause I'm having a good time, having a good time. I'm a shooting star leaping through the sky like a tiger, defying the laws of gravity. I'm a racing car passing by like Lady.
Okay, that's enough. Thank you. I'm a developer currently based on New York City, working at Mapsen, where I'm helping to build a 3D map engine and experimenting with maps and shaders. But 7 years ago, I was a psychologist and an expressive art therapist in Buenos Aires. Oh, too close. I'm going to talk about the synchronicities that led me here. At the very end of 2009, I was an expressive art therapist in Buenos Aires, building a website for my business. The site name was Arte para Sanarte, which is a word brave, meaning art to heal. I made it in Flash, and thanks to the Wayback Machine, I recovered for you today in GIF form. And this is the second of a few embarrassing things I'm going to be showing today. And I think it's appropriate because this talk is going to be a spiral too. So while I was working on this website, I need to figure out how to work with XML files. So I searched for processing XML, and in the first of many synchronicities, I end up here. Yeah. Yeah, to a web page that I'm sure is familiar to a lot of us, right? And it took me a while to understand what's going on in this page, that it was a community of people making art with code. I felt that I tapped into a world of misfits like me, and I want to use these tools for expressive art therapy. So let's spiral back to art therapy for a second. The expressive art therapy approach flows between different artistic languages, like music, painting, sculpture, and dance, to discover, amplify, and transform emotions and processes in the body. It feels pretty much like being in a state of play, but these non-verbal languages allows you to dive very deep. And each one of these languages gives you the ability to express your interior landscape in a different way. For example, sculpture is about letting shape emerge, while painting is more like a sedimental process, where meaning is deposited on layers, one after the other. And movement lets you embody a feeling and transform it over time. Yeah, this actually happens. In South America, we can trace this kind of activities to the pioneer work of the Brazilian artist Lydia Clark. She, in the 1970s, created interactive works that directly involve museum goers in a collaboratory sensory experience. In the late 70s, she shifted from created artwork to work entirely as an art therapist. Expressive art therapy is usually done together with others. It's a very experiential, organic, and intense process. That's why we usually end up constructing collective mandalas as a way to tie individual experience back to the group. So, because I was already working with all these expressive art languages, when I discovered processing, I was moved by the use of code as an expressive language. So you can imagine, no? I emailed all the artists I could find who were working on new media, asking for them if they knew somebody that was working on Argentina. And Chris Sugur emailed me back. She suggests to get in contact with Diego Alberti, which I did, and he suggests to apply to Interactivos Telefónica. Interactivos Telefónica in that moment was like IBM of Buenos Aires. So we apply, and here we are, Interactivos 2010, Interactivos 2010. And I made great friends there, like Tomás Roski, Joaquín Aras, Javier Vilatz, Jorge Crow, Guido Corallo, Leo Solás, Chris Reinaga, Rodrigo Alonso, and many others. It's a wonderful community there. At that time, I was also working as an art therapist with kids in a community center called Kalos, and that really influenced the project that I made in Interactivos. With the kids in mind, at Interactivos, I work on a collective drawing installation. I made a device to try to promote interaction between people instead of alienation. But I found that installation didn't get people to interact in the ways I imagined. Kids were using it to discharge all their energy and anxiety, so they are actually not paying attention to each other. While grown-ups were interacting in a polite way, like trying not to break the table and, yes. So I felt that the technological field of installation had too much gravity. People interact much differently with this digital collective mandala than they did when painting a collective mandala on paper. So these reflections led me to make my next project, Efecto Mariposa, or Butterfly Effect, was made in 2011. I wanted to make it a more sensitive installation, where technology was hidden beneath a more natural interface. The Kinect was new back in those days, and I did a real-time simulation of the different spheres of an ecosystem. So it was a topological part with all the scanning and the normal maps, and then there was a geosphere, a hydrosphere, a biosphere, an atmosphere, altogether. It was programmed in such a way that the ecosystem suffers if people interact with it in an aggressive way. Then they had to wait until the system regained balance to interact again. This forced a gentle experimentation with the system. Another synchronicity happens while I was making Efecto Mariposa. But to explain it, and explain what I mean with the synchronicity, I had to spiral back to psychology. So I'm from Buenos Aires, right? And Buenos Aires, together with Paris and Upper East Side, is probably one of the last places on the world where people do and enjoy psychoanalysis. It's real. So among Buenos Aires therapists, everybody is into this guy, Sigmund Freud. But I was very into this other guy, his arch enemy, Carl Gustav Jung. As most arch enemies, they used to be friends, and in fact, Jung was one of the favorite students of Freud. So at the beginning of the 1900s, it was very fashionable for psychoanalysts to keep dream diaries. Jung, as a good psychoanalyst in that moment, had one where he wrote and drew his own dreams. Jung was very interested in the mythological content of dreams. While Freud thought the unconscious content of dreams comes from personal memories, Jung believed that the unconscious content came from a place deeper than personal memories. Jung believed that everybody's personal unconscious goes deeper into a collective source of unconscious material. He called it collective unconscious. Jung also used this idea of a collective unconscious to explain meaningful coincidences that seems to be connected more than cause and effect. Like dreaming about an event before it happens, or witnessing something where the world seems to be trying to speak to you or giving you a message. He differentiated this concept from chance and randomness by using the word synchronicity. So it's hard to speak about random or chance without pointing to the work of Casey Rias. Casey, in this book, together with his collaborators, points to the complexity behind perfect computational random, right? For example, in shaders, which I love and I will explain more about that, which is a parallel programming language designed to run in the graphic card, there is not such a thing as a random function, so you have to construct it yourself. I made this little example. I recode temprint, which is a maze algorithm, into a shader. And you can see that in lines between 14 and 16, I think is there, I am constructing a pseudo-random from a sine wave, which is not particularly symbolic. But if I want to open this random to a Jungian concept of synchronicity, I should use more symbolical source than a sine wave, something that is more open to the complexity and the serendipity of the collective, like, for example, the wind. Here, I modify the previous code to use wind directions, wind speed, and temperature collected from the US NOAA servers during the last 2 months. So I'm using this data to construct 3 different types of noise and random, and using that to construct 3 different types of mazes. And I think I would like to think that Jung will like this gesture. Jung was noticing that he was having recurring vivid nightmares. Nightmares about floods, nightmares about volcanoes. To the point he was worried that he thought he was becoming schizophrenic. He also noticed that many of his patients were having the similar nightmares. And he worried that somehow he was infecting his patients with his own nightmares. Then, when the First World War started, he found another explanation for these collective nightmares. Here's a description in his diary. Jung wasn't a great guy, right? He was all happy about his discoveries while the war was breaking out. These collective nightmares, he was noticed, became his support for this idea of the collective unconscious. And for him, they were fed by the subsoil of the collective unconscious, tapping into a future vision that war was coming. In June 2011, almost like exactly 5 years ago, after 50 years of lying dormant and without any notice, a volcano on the south of Chile called Puchehue erupted. This eruption ejected around 100 million tons of ashes and sand. Here's a satellite view. Here's a little map that I made. So wind embodying chance move these ashes and plume all the way to Buenos Aires. What are the chances of this happening, right? I was living there, and the ashes brought destruction. Airports were closed for weeks. Supermarket shelves empty. And in those days, everything felt fragile. This eruption happens while I was working on Efecto Mariposa. I had planned to use sand for the installation, but instead I used Puchehue's ashes. That just made the work more significant for those who experienced it, and the eruption motivated me to tune the algorithm simulating different layers of the ecosystem to make it more complex, less linear, more temperamental, and sensitive to the interactions. The synchronicity of the volcano influenced both the form of the installation and the functions. It ended up reacting in unexpected ways. To make Efecto Mariposa, I had to learn how to code in GLSL shaders. Although it was make it all in open frameworks, I needed to learn how to code in shaders in order to do these simulations in real time. And I absolutely fell in love with shaders. I love shaders because of the constraints and simplicity. Here there is no libraries, there is only mathematical functions. The inputs are images and the outputs are only images. It's code from the perspective of the pixels, the individual elements that compose an image. I think them very similar to a haiku. All you have to do is describe an image in few sentences of code. This forced me to think algorithms from the perspective of the pixels, the atoms, the minimal components. And I'm not there yet, but I think the simplicity of shaders can be an expressive language. So anyway, I grabbed all these layers of simulations I was doing with shaders for Efecto Mariposa, and I broke them into different modules and put them together into an open frameworks add-on. My first open source contribution was called OFX FX. And thankfully, it got very popular and helps others to incorporate shaders into their own work. It was thanks to this add-on that I get to meet Momo and Zach Lieberman. Thanks to Zach, I applied to Parsons, and I moved to New York City. This is a map of me arriving. David Bowie style. So now we are going to fast forward 2 years and into 2014, while I was working on my thesis for Parsons. And I was working on a series of projects about awareness and the tools we use to see the world around us. This machine in particular prints a large-scale horizon showing the transition between the city to the mountains. And to construct this continuous horizon, I was scraping Google Street View data, finding different ways to stitch these panoramic views together. I found this depth map data hidden in the API. Having a sea allows me to add up points of clouds together, and the result was for me to reinventing photography again. I just have to choose a location, put my camera in focus, and then wait for the calls to come back from the servers with point of light. These images of public spaces emerge slowly from the depth of a private database. I worked with it, with the style, until I felt the results were honest about the nature of the process. I have a little interactive here. So I was preparing for this talk, and I want to make some new point clouds for Eyeo, only to discover that Google's API changed. So, yeah, right? So sometime between 2014 and now, Google made these images into a limited edition. This is an intrinsic fragility in working with proprietary tools. At Mapsen, we work with open standards, using community-created and maintained data, like OpenStreetMap data. Everything we do is on the open. I have also the privilege of working with a stellar lineup of some of the best professionals in the field. Like, for example, Geraldine Sarmiento, that is here today in Eyeo. There, I work as a graphic engineer, doing experiments on the open, pushing the limits of what can be done with maps and open data. Like this project called Line of Sight. This shows all the satellites overhead of a given moment. Also working with open source helps build up community. These are some of the projects of people using maps and tools. And I wonder how much of the community in this room exists because processing and open frameworks. This relationship between openness and community is a solution for fragility. That's why I wrote the book of shaders together with my wife, Jen, so other people don't need to replicate my difficult and esoteric process of teaching yourself shaders. This is some work of my students at Parsons. We use the book as material, and here they're showing homework. This is the work of Kenichi Shoneda, who becomes one of the major contributors of the book. He helps to translate it to Japanese. This is the work of Joseph Fiola, who used patterns on his VJ performance. This happens in Montreal at the beginning of the year. Seems pretty cool. So these are some of the people who have joined these projects, donating time and effort to help others to learn. I'm so thankful to them. They have translated the book of shaders to Japanese, Korean, Chinese, Spanish, and French. And also there is an Italian version on the way. Also, thanks to them and talking to them has bring new voices to the project, and then in that moment that you feel that the project has having a life on its own. So I'm going to jump into live performance mode. And I want to show you how, along with writing the teaching metaphors of the book, I found myself developing tools around it. So, and drawing, right? So here I'm explaining about the how to mix two colors, and there's different ways to do it in shaders, and one of them is using a three-dimensional variable. So the and here together with that is an embed editor, and this has been great because it diminishes the distance. It makes shorter the distance between the learning of a concept to training it on code. Also, I developed this kind of helpers to make these abstract concepts more tangible. And it's very interesting because, for example, this vec3 is a three-dimensional variable, right? And because it's essentially maths, this can be a color, or it could be also a position in space. This concept is interchangeable in shaders, and because shaders are basically mathematical functions and vectors, and they have that plasticity, right? So let's do together a little example. So I'm going to make this transition of this mixing of two colors from cyan to red, and I'm going to be using this variable called PCT, which I use a lot. It means percentage for me. And together with in the editor, I put a little some debugging tools. It's very hard to debug shaders because there's no other output rather than images. So you don't get console logs or something like that. That's too fancy. So everything is images. So if you click and you hover over a variable, you will see something appears in the GUIDR. And if you click on that, you can see what the content of that variable. So in this case, we can see how the percentage goes from 0 to 1 using the x-axis. Let me help you by zooming in. That's better? Perfect. So so the mix function, which is happening here, can also use three-dimensional vectors, right? So now we're in each channel is going to have a different function. So I'm using different shaping functions to mix these two colors in different ways for each one of the channels. So in the red channel, I'm going to use this, and I can modify. And it was very important for me that these helpers are there so they can tweak. Most of my work is about tweaking, so so you can I'm doing shaping functions to whatever I want. So let's watch again this variable, and you can see how now it transforms over time. We can do the same thing with, for example, the color. At the beginning is declared as black, and then here the colors are mixed, and then here I'm adding these lines in order to show how the percentage in each channel is varying. So the people that is using this can, once they have something that they want to show, they can come here and they can download the file, export to an URL. So let's do some of this. So this, you can export it and edit it later, or you can export it as an artwork. So you come here, copy this guy, and you can display it in this way. So this makes it very easy for people that is using the book to share content, and that for me was very important. So everything that is exported gets to this place, and people is using the editor every day, and so I have the privilege to come here and sneak and see what people is working on, and what's new, and etc. So lately, I have been writing shaders for an open frame that I made from a Raspberry Pi and some garbage that I found in my apartment basement, more particularly this garbage. I have been enjoying the challenge of making shaders harmonious enough to live in my house, and I have spiraled back around to mandalas, my old friends from art therapy. Mandalas refers loosely to any symbolic circular form that refers to the whole, and we can find them in all major religions. So, also you can find it here in Minneapolis. The other day I was walking back to the hotel and I found this in the chapel that it was close to the hotel. And this is Jung's diagram of the psyche, and you can see with the collective unconscious in the center. And you can note how deliberately he made it look like a mandala. So traditional Tibetan Buddhist mandalas are made from grains of sand. They are ritualistically created and destroyed. This seems like a practice of fragility. Remember Jung's flood nightmares that I was telling about the collective unconscious? Here's a description of it. Visions of flood are already happening in worldwide, and scientists have predicted about 0.5 meter and 1.5 meter sea level rising by 2100. These are fragile times. This is Rio, a beautiful, complicated city that I love. At Mapsen, we are working in visualizing in a visualization of sea level rising. It's made of our vector tiles, made of OpenStreetMap data, together with our new elevation raster tiles. Combined, it's possible to construct a terrain with world coverage and see what areas are affected by the sea level. So let me zoom. Yeah. Although sea level rise estimates disagree, and it's hard to find consensus on papers, this map will be useful to help with the communication around climate change. Here are 2 other cities, San Francisco and New York. Like Efecto Mariposa, these are images of fragile and complex systems, fighting for balance, reacting non-linearly, temperamentally, unpredictably. I found in the ephemeral nature of mandalas the harmony to accept fragility, to be gentle and listen the flow, to be open to others and the whole. I found refuge in synchronicity, in the fact that doing an internet search for XML 6.5 years ago did me here. Looking back, synchronicities invite me to New York, to be in Zach's class, that led me to this other moment. Also, led me to work in the open, which led me here today with you. Thanks to every person and every event that interweave a path, a network, a home, a family with me. Thanks you, Ola.